Okay. So I suggest we get started. Welcome everyone to today's big conversation, which is all about going within is good for the world, writing the self for global citizenship education. You can click to the next slide, maybe, Mijke. So far, we've already had a number of big conversations relating to global citizenship, and every time we'll touch upon a different facet. So we already had sessions where we talked more about the democratic part, or connecting to the sustainable development goals, or role of specific institutions. And today we really focus on the self. And we do this with two wonderful speakers. And if you can go to the next slide, Mijke. So a very warm welcome to our presenters, Reinekke Lengelle, if you can click on Mijke, and Mijke Post, who's clicking through the slides. Reinekke, she's been with the Hague University for some time already as a researcher within the Sustainable Talent Development Research Group. But is also an associate professor of interdisciplinary studies at the Athabasca University in Canada, and she's joining us from Canada, so it's very early, 7 a.m. in the morning. So very grateful that you can make yourself available for us, Reinekke. And then we have Mijke Post, who we've known for a long time as well, a lecturer and a coach at our institution, involved in lifelong learning at the Faculty of Management and Organization. Reinekke, I forgot to say, has particular expertise in writing the self for personal development, and is a co-creator of career writing. And Mijke's specific interests falls within identity learning, career learning, storytelling, and writing, among many other things. And today they will lead us through a big conversation, maybe in a slightly different way, because they would also like us to experience what writing for the self entails. So very much look forward to that. But before I hand over the floor, maybe if you can click on to the next slide, Mijke, just some household rules, if you will. By now, I think you've all been aware that the session is being recorded, as we would like to share it on our YouTube channel for the Center of Expertise of Global and Inclusive Learning, so you can go back for the recording if need be. Please make sure that your microphone is muted during the session, because otherwise there might be a lot of feedback. And if you have any questions during the discussion or afterwards, it's a small group, so maybe it's if you feel comfortable, just unmute yourself. Otherwise, just type a comment and question, and I'll try and moderate that later on. But I think that's all for the introduction for now, and I gladly hand over the floor to Reinekke and Mijke.
Yes,
thank you.
Welcome everyone, new and familiar faces. So I'm glad you could join us for this conversation. And indeed, it's Matt and I are going to talk about. We're going to each tell a short, a small story about how this works, so you get an idea. We're not going to emphasize greatly the theory because we don't have time for that in an hour. But we have many publications on this topic, also as it applies to global citizen education. And so if you want a book chapter or article from us, there's actually a new one coming out at the end of January for a research project, Happy You, that Mijke and other teachers did at the Hague University. So we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on the experiential and the stories to illustrate in this short hour that we have. So what I'd like everyone to begin with is, I'm assuming everyone has brought something to write with. If not, please do grab some paper and a pen for yourself. And we're going to invite you to write down a question that is alive for you, a question relating to your relationship with others in this globalized world, and something that you experience as tension-filled. So it could be about the environment. It could be about the fact that we can't travel very much these days. It can be feeling at odds with people you work with, and that you think there's a cultural tension happening. So write down what you what you would love to have the answer to if you did have an answer to the question. So just start there. First thought, best thought, as the Beat poet said. So go with the question that is alive for you. And it's important to write it down. Okay, so finish your thought or question, and you have it written down now. So that's important. We're going to revisit this. And now we'll maybe go to the next slide, and we'll reiterate the principle of this presentation is that the democracy that we try to achieve in society depends on the quality of internal democracy. So only when we navigate our internal world can we actually create a true democratic process without. So, you know, we all probably know the very famous saying by Gandhi, you know, be the change you want to see in the world. And that sounds like a cliche, but it's so important to be able to navigate that. And Mike is going to tell a story about how writing the self applies in this context, and I'll tell the story from my student work as well. So, Meg, over to you.
Yeah. Well, when we started Happy You, which is one of the projects that we did on writing the self and career writing, we had an intake interview with each participating student. And I remember one of our students that we had an intake with. And during the intake, the student was very anxious and very withdrawn and shy. And we were really hesitant in whether or not to let the student in. But the student was also telling us that the student wanted to feel connected, have more feelings of being connected. And so we let the student in, and in the first few weeks that we worked together with the group of students, this student was really withdrawn and shy and having a lot of feelings of anxiety. But as the course proceeded, during the middle of the course, the students started to share stories and respond to other people's stories and started to share little pieces of what the student wrote. And by the end of the course, this student really was one of those students who became an ambassador and became one of the students who really was the networking, and we have a group of alumni who participated in Happy You, and this student really articulated in one of his poems and one of his poetries that to let these feelings of anxiety and of shyness and being a refugee coming to the Netherlands and feeling, really not welcome or not at home and safe, really made it the opportunity to connect to others and to become a professional in social work and to use this as a professional in social work. So this for me, this is an example of a very steep learning curve that is not only makes it really easier to stick knowledge to it, but also to make skills training much more smoothly, not to speak of you know, the difference, the change in attitudes and values that we always try to avoid, because it's so difficult and so hard to work on attitudes and values and to have them into the curriculum. So this is one of the really memories that I look back on, that is really yes, it's really helpful, and also what we do it for.
Thank you, Mijke. And writing the self, for anyone who's not familiar with the method, is using a creative, expressive, and reflective writing. So creative, expressive, and reflecting forms of writing to stimulate the internal dialogue. You know, and education is largely focused on external dialogues, like what did this expert say? What did that expert say? It doesn't spend as much time going into that internal world to find out what is it that's going on inside. And I'll tell a little story from my work as well, which ended up being a book chapter. I co-wrote a book chapter in this book with two of my graduate students here in Canada. All three of us live here in the province. And for anyone who knows a little bit about Canadian history, you know, we have a difficult, challenging history about how white settlers have treated the original people of Canada, who we call First Nations. So I'm going to use the term First Nation so you understand. It's the Aboriginal people in Canada. We have great social problems, very much like New Zealand, Australia. We struggle with these things, and Canada is known as being this wonderful country, a peace-loving country, and yet we have this very dark past. Which is now finally sort of being looked at more substantially. And so in 2015, the government finally came out with recommendations in order to, it's called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in order to address some of these things. But one of the important messages from this document was that we cannot change unless we change within. So we cannot do the good things without actually embodying and being convinced of the good things that we want to do and the understanding that we want to bring. Now, this is an illustration from a student of mine. I had a First Nation student join my course called Writing the Self some years ago, and she said already at the beginning of the course that she felt quite unwell. Now, she writes about this in her chapter, so I'm able to tell you it's not a confidential story. It is in the chapter. She said she was so ill she couldn't swallow her food. She went to the doctor, but they couldn't find anything that was wrong with her. She joined the course. She said, I don't know if I'll keep up after the first couple of weeks. I probably have to drop the course. But what she discovered as she was writing the self is that she actually had internalized a loathing for being part of the Aboriginal culture. She thought, if I can become as white as possible, act as white as possible, be successful like white people are, and go away from my cultural background of being First Nations, then I will be better off. Because she had this internalized racism. She said people that are First Nations are often unsuccessful, drunk, fat, abused, have no chances at success. She writes about these, using these exact words also in the chapter. Well, no wonder she was so ill. She literally could not swallow this story of her own identity. She had such a sense of self-loathing as a result of this internalized racism. So as she started writing this, she realized the story that she had told about herself was very ill, and as a result, she felt very ill. And she started to undo this story beautifully, and talks about the very deep pain of identity loss. And that is, she says, that's why we also have in our culture such high suicide rates and such in our culture. So she said, I didn't know how much I myself was suffering until I started to write my story down and actually witness that story. So it was an incredible unfolding for her, and she to this day is well, and she's a social activist, and and has really in her life found great value. She said the course actually saved my life, she has said to me. Now, the other student who co-wrote the chapter was a white woman who was teaching First Nations students. And she said, I have internalized racism myself. She said, I have very good friends that are First Nations people. I live on First Nations territory, and yet I know I have these stereotyped ideas inside myself. And if I am to help my students, I must find out what my hidden stories are about First Nations people. She said, I realized I grew up with all the stereotypes. On the one hand, the cowboys and Indians type images. And on the other hand, this idea that First Nations people were troubled. We didn't mix. They were over there on the reservation, and they were other than we were. So she worked closely together with a First Nations knowledge keeper in order to sort of start to work with her stories. And she wrote a final paper for her master's degree talking about how she decolonized herself through the Writing the Self method in order to understand how our default responses are going to be based on our deep story programming and not on what we think we want to be like. So over here, we are tolerant, accepting, we see everyone as the same, but our deep programming, which is embedded in our unconscious and embedded in our body, by default, we have all sorts of assumptions. So even as Mijke and I sit here, you look at us, and some of you may think, what are two white women doing talking about this topic? Or you might look at me and say, oh, look at that jacket. She must have right-wing political leanings. Or she must be a professor and she must have left-wing political leanings. So you all have assumptions just by the mere fact of meeting like this. So those are the things that we want to uncover, because we cannot change things fundamentally until we have examined those things. And interestingly, before we go on to the next step of this conversation, I found out when I was 11 years old that I have a half sister who is half Surinamese, and we share the same biological father. And when I was a young woman I think I was 21 when I went to meet her for the first time, and I remember thinking, I was a student at the University of Leiden, and I remember thinking, I wonder if at the house of these Surinamese people, these Black people, whether they're going to, be different. Like, what do I have to be prepared for? And really, the mother served me tea, and she served me gebakjes, and I thought, this is amazing. It's very similar to what we do at home too, And I noticed I was watching myself in the situation thinking, look at how I'm assuming that things are going to be a certain way, or that I have to be cautious in this way or cautious in that way. And so it's been an incredible learning opportunity. And my own father, who fathered this beautiful daughter, has said, even though I love this woman and I have children with her, I'm actually also racist inside. I have many assumptions about Surinamese people that I've internalized, and I don't want to think those ways, but he said, I have internalized those things. So his courage to say those things have given me the courage also to look at these things and to start to uncover, to uncover our internalized assumptions and stereotypes and racism. And because it keeps us apart in this world, and we're all, I always say, we're all of the same heart. And how do we get there? We have to do self-exploration to get there. So,
yes, and before we continue, there was also one Slovenian student that I remember that she said like the Hague University is a UNESCO school, and we're supposed to do sustainable development goals. And she thought about big actions like, being Greenpeace or whatever. And she concluded by, well, actually the option, the space, the safe space to have all these kinds of stories shared with all kinds of students from all kinds of different backgrounds was the best, small steps that I could take, rather than choosing one goal that is for starvation or whatever. It's like a daily business, and it's very small steps to take. Yeah, that's another story that I remember that was very valuable. Okay. So there's many more stories to tell, but we will get back to the question that you wrote down. And we invite you to take a look at it and see if it has changed or if you need to rewrite your question.
Yeah, just take the time to actually put it on the page. And you might find that it just writes itself out the way that it did, or that it actually has changed in just these 15 minutes that we've been sharing, because the unconscious keeps working in the background. And the question may have deepened or become more specific. Okay. Know that you can always revisit any of the writing that you've done or any of the questions that you are curious about. You know, and later on in today or tomorrow, a new question may arise for you, and you can write that one down as well. So in order to explore some responses to the question, not so much answers, but to respond to the question, we're going to do this small writing exercise based on the work of Mark Savickas, who's a researcher in the area of narrative development and careers. Is the childhood hero. So who was your childhood hero? So it might be someone from television. It might be someone from a children's book that you read as a child. So I always recommend before age 10, someone you really look up to. And Mark Savickas, who came up with this exercise, he said, don't choose your mother or father, but you can choose an aunt or a grandfather or a cousin, someone you admired as a child. And just write down their name, or it could be a character again from a book or a superhero. And once you found the name of that person or character, it might even be an animal out of a story, just write down in a few sentences who this character is in a way that I'd be able to understand if I'd never heard of them. So I always give the example, say it's Pippi Longstocking. You say, okay, well, this girl's very independent. She lives on her own. Her father's out at sea. And she's so strong, she's able to lift a horse, you know, and she's incredibly brave. And so just write a description of your childhood hero and give yourself a few minutes to do that. just take one more minute to finish up your description. And I think maybe we can go back one slide, Meg, and to the dialogue portion. Okay. So yeah, so we want to write a dialogue using your childhood hero to be in conversation with your question, just like we've written here below you. You know, my question is, for instance, my question is, so how do I, as a white woman, work with sensitivity in, for instance, the content of Black Lives Matter and other important themes? You know, I have a book chapter coming from a colleague in the United States, a professor, and so, you know, how do I talk to her about her chapter in a way that is sensitive so that we also get the best out of her work? So how do I, as a white woman, having those assumptions? So, and then I've written the childhood hero. And my childhood hero, just to give you an example, is Yoda from Star Wars, which I saw when I was about 10 years old. And so he's a little green man who's, you know, I remember him especially from the movie The Empire Strikes Back. He has a grumbly voice and he pauses before he contemplates an answer. He's a teacher, and his message is that we are all connected by an invisible energy field called the Force. And he's a Jedi Master, which means that he stands for peace, wisdom, and he believes that any shadow that we perceive outside ourselves is actually one that is inside us. So, okay, so start the dialogue here, and we'll give you a few minutes to do that as well, and to see what response comes forth from this conversation. So let's give it one more minute. So you're writing your dialogue. Okay, I'm going to finish your thought or sentence, knowing you can return to this at any time. And one of the things that we do in all the workshops, and Mijke and I are, it's very much a part of the work that we do, is just to check in with your body right now in this moment. How are you? How are you sitting in your chair? How are your feet on the floor? Is your back relaxed? Do you need to take a breath? Yeah, just move your body as it's asking you to be moved right now. This is an important part of the process because a lot of the assumptions that we are exploring are also sort of embedded in tensions in the body. Candace Pert, a biological researcher of cellular health, has said that our unconscious and the body are the same, and that's where the unconscious resides. So that's why our body knows so many things that we're in denial about up here, you know. And so we want to get in touch with that. That's really part of our sensory system that we need to identify themes and also to transcend some of our fears and such, is this connection with the body. Not to be underestimated. Okay, so maybe what we'd like to do is have some group discussion and some examples of what happened for you when you went into dialogue, for instance, with your childhood hero, and if you would like to talk about the question that came up for you and share what happened, we welcome some responses from the group. So you can unmute yourself and just jump in.
Yes, it would be lovely to hear some stories. Anyone? Yes, Nathan, please join.
Sure. And sorry for not being so cheerful in the beginning. I had to walk to another room, so but I'm very happy to be here with you. So what I did is I formulated a question, and it actually changed after hearing your and Reinekke's story. And then I asked my hero. So I just talk you through it. So what my first question was how to keep relations good with friends who highly and very emotionally differ with me on opinions on the COVID and the vaccines. This is of course actually happening. And then I heard you, and then I rephrased it to how to understand what is happening in these friends' lives and how they act upon it. So I kind of kicked the relationship out. And then my hero, I hope everybody from Holland knows him, is the Gerben. Gerben, he's the farmhand in the Chameleon, which is a children's book series, yeah. It's like 50 books. On book 50, he's actually the farmer, and he is a kind of guy who does what he does. He's like the farmhand, the servant, and he's a joker and a storyteller, and he reluctantly comes to the rescue in his own easy way when it's necessary. So he's actually the last rescuer. Well, and I couldn't think of a hero, but then he came up. So well. So I asked him this question, how to understand what is happening with these friends. And then Gerben, he told me, you never know what is going on in other people's minds. So it's an excellent and a useless question at the same time. That's what he told me. And then of course I asked him, what should I do? And then he said, can't you just ignore it for a while because they might be going through the same process as you do. So that's what I got back. And that kind of helped me, I guess. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And can you just say why it helped you? What kind of sensationals did you experience as you say, you know, ignore it for a bit, leave it alone for a bit? That's what I'm getting from you. So tell us how that helps.
Well, so I think because I couldn't think of a hero up front, and then I chose Gerben, and he's kind of the man I am inside as well. So actually, I'm very laid back. I like a good joke. I don't really care much for troubles. So this being upset by my friends is not really who I am.
Yes.
It's not my natural state. So I told myself, well, it's not you, leave it, and time will tell. So that's kind of helpful, because then, the worries about these situations are not my worries. They are worries, but they are not helpful in any way.
Yes. Thank you for that, Nathan. And that's an excellent example of how usually the responses that come out of a dialogue like that are more true to our nature.
Exactly, yeah.
Our nature is often is to care for other people, even if they have different opinions. That feels more like us. So thank you for that excellent example and illustration. So yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.
So yeah, and the interesting thing here too is about that this seems counterintuitive. It's like, you know, somebody who's in their rational brain will say, yeah, but Nathan's not dealing with the problem. He should be, you know, taking action, or why isn't he? You can't just ignore problems. But actually, you'd be surprised by the inner wisdom of letting things be for a time, because it also gives somebody an opportunity to come forward. So he does not know yet what is going to come out of this. He knows right now, though, it brings him peace. And how do we, you know, one of the things I like to say is, don't give people a piece of your mind, give them the peace of your mind, you know? So, okay, so who else would like to respond? We have time for someone else to come forward and share their experience, or to ask a question. So please, yes, Kashfi?
Yes. I had a lot of childhood heroes. En ze hadden kan ik Nederlands praten, want ik ben gewoon niet gewend.
I don't know if there's
Engels hier? Spreekt iemand geen Nederlands hier?
I'm not sure if there's an only English speaker.
Maybe for the video. Yeah, get it out.
Just want to try. My childhood heroes were Oprah Winfrey. Because growing up, there wasn't a lot of colored representation.
Yes.
Angelina Jolie, because she was a UN ambassador, and dat was allemaal een soort van dat had te maken met UNESCO. En I am a UNESCO ambassador for the whole NOC, the institution I work for. And that is a function, a role they developed because I asked for it. So there is a lot of conversation in my head growing up about not seeing colored people around, and the frustration I have dealing with that. So and like my biggest frustration is not being able to not being equipped to have a conversation about things I'm passionate about, like equality, feminism, etc. Because I work for an institution where there are a lot of male white directors, school directors, and there is, you know, people in the educational field, they know that like working on a school or a university, it's very like the productivity is very high. So everyone has like a full head, so there isn't enough room to have a conversation, and I'm not seeing any openness or any willing goodwill. Like maybe there is, but I'm not seeing it, and that's my biggest frustration is not being able to, not having the vaardigheden, the skills to make something happen, because I just feel it's very important not to be seen as such, but it's like you feel you have the solution for something very important, and you can't do anything about it. So it's giving me a lot of hopelessness. So that's my biggest
Yes.
thing.
Yeah. Yes. And did you formulate a question, Kashfi, that you answered based on Oprah or Angelina Jolie? Like, did you have a dialogue about a question that was alive for you?
Yes, my like in conversation with my own school director, I refer to the UNESCO goals as my own DNA, like the way, like it's so a big part of me. So the question was, how do I settle my own role, my own DNA in this professional world, like in this society where, in this professional society where people are not always open for anything new.
Yes. Yes. And how was there a response that you wrote as you used say Oprah as your dialogue partner, or?
Well, the answer came from Princess Diana.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people in my head. You are one of them. So, well, I admired. I'm not there yet. I'm a bit like Nathan. It's like I don't have the solutions yet, but I admired Princess Diana's ability to make something horrible, like the paparazzi and like all the negative around that, turn into something constructive. So, like me, that's like the thing I'm going to work van. Dus vanuit daar moet ik werken. But I don't have any solutions, or I just have an insight, not a concrete something.
Thank you for sharing that. And isn't that beautiful that Kashfi dares to be in the uncertainty? She doesn't rush towards an answer. She has some ideas already in what direction her question is. That in itself is also incredibly valuable. And so I commend you, for the courage not to have that answer, to rush towards that answer. But your dialogue was really, the internal dialogue that we have on the paper is really to get a response going, a beginning of a response. So yes, so yeah. Who else Claudia, would you like to speak to this? I saw your message. Would you like to speak to this as well?
I was just commenting on that closing remark that I find just sums up so much. Such a simple sentence. I don't have a solution, but I have an insight. And I think if we hang on to that, it can also give us a lot of hope to find ways and solutions to our own situations. I'm not going to share mine. It's very detailed, and I'm not ready to share it yet. But I'm going to hang on to this sentence because I think it's going to help me.
Mm-hmm. Yes, beautiful. And the lovely thing is when we work in a group like this, and this method, writing the self, is meant to be done in a group, we benefit tremendously from the words that each of us offer. Like all of us have benefited from something here today in the story, or Nathan's example of letting it be for a bit, and Kashfi's example of saying, I don't have a solution, but I have an insight. These things we can take with us. So we also borrow from the collective mind when we work together like this. And also, Claudia, I want to say thank you for not sharing because you weren't ready to share, and you honored that.
I'm not ready to share. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. That's right. And that is honoring yourself too. That is being in touch with yourself and knowing what timing is right for you,
Thank you. But I do find that the exercise of writing it and talking to that fictional character for me does help, because it helps you sort of take distance from it and put it in a different perspective. So I find it a very valuable exercise.
Great.
I'm going to continue this at home.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you. Adela, I see your hand.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to ask a question. As you know, Reinekke and Mijke, I've done this kind of exercise quite a lot, also with students. And I had quite a few times that the students themselves, they say, I don't have a hero, I don't have anyone, I cannot think about anyone. So do you have a workaround for this? Because then it's kind of frustrating, even if you try to let them think about it, it doesn't come out. So you have also this kind of situation sometimes.
Yes, what I usually say is there's usually a school teacher or an uncle or an aunt or grandmother that has been significant in somebody's life, even in a minor way, even somebody that just like a school teacher that wasn't judgmental or something like that. So you can draw usually from something like that. So yeah, indeed the asking for people to think of their childhood hero, just the hero, is often difficult. It took me quite a while to actually uncover that for me, the Yoda is the childhood hero. So, but if I had been asked to do this exercise freshly, I probably would have chosen a grandfather in my, my life. It would have served as well. So we can still make the creative leaps that way, as long as it's not sort of mother and father, because mother and father is really where we get our basic programming from, whereas the hero or the person we admired is the person we identify with, which forms our identity. So the parents really are behind us as supports and influence, but looking forward in who we want to be is that hero. And that's why psychologically it makes sense to look beyond the parental unit. So, but thanks for the question. And I've run across that as well.
Yes, and the other thing is that if you do this kind of work in groups, not only do you hear other people's stories, but also people can help each other. Like, well, if this exercise doesn't work for you right now, then listen to what other people come up with, and then you maybe next time or at home you can do this exercise again, and you have some inspiration from others.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. And just experiencing other people's stories and just being a listener in that sense is also indeed valuable.
Yeah. Sometimes it is very far away, it takes some time to really dive into, the age before 10 years old.
Yeah. And Evka, you just wrote that you enjoyed a character, and that's also enough for a dialogue partner. Did it work for you as you were dialoguing with that character that you enjoyed?
Yeah, it actually did. I think the association I have with hero or admiring might have sort of blocked my mind a little bit. So I thought back, okay, at an early stage, what did I enjoy in terms of fiction or television series? And I thought of a book that I'd almost memorized as a little girl when I was 4 years old. So apparently that character interested me. And it turned out to be a character, as Floddertje, also for Dutch colleagues might be well known. She's the complete opposite of me, but maybe I want to be a little bit like her, because she was always very dirty. And I used to be, I always kept, my clothes were always impeccable, and didn't matter, I'd stay clean throughout the day, and she never did. So yeah, she represented an opposite, and that helped also in writing the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Well, it took me years before I always started with Roald Dahl before the age of 10. But then later I came up with Grace Jones, who was really someone who I admired a lot. But it took me years to reach Grace Jones, because I had forgotten on her. But I like the way she moves on the catwalk and barely naked. Which is a bit unlike me, but
yes. But interestingly, the model we use for identity in this theory of writing the self is the dialogical self theory, which is that we're multi-voiced. We have many aspects, and even Evka, I imagine, and you too, Mijke, in that having that so-called opposite sort of character you're drawn to, that it really creates a kind of sense of balance within you. It helps you bring in some new impulses into your way of being. And so that's maybe why we're drawn to those sort of opposites in some respects that looks like opposites. But if you look at their courage and their willingness to express themselves as they are, that is something that I think is innate to humans, you know, and that is what we all aspire to have that courage. So you'll find in those characters that often your own desired, you know, characteristics are in there. So yeah, and then we call this going through, you know, instead of going through the front door of the neocortex and the rational answers, we're using the creativity and the backdoor approach to actually be able to access some of our wisdom, and making that creative leap is what helps us to do that. So maybe we want to leave the last 5 minutes for final final questions or comments. And Meg has pulled up a slide now for all the people that are involved and have been involved with this process of learning over the years, and have given their heart to do this work. And so.
Yes, and I would like to dedicate also to Sunaika Phillips, who made a couple of the slides that we used today. So she's, I should mention her to thank her.
Yes.
I didn't know I was part of it.
Yes, you are.
As one of our first research subjects, and motivated people. So thank you for that. So any final questions? Yeah, Nathan.
Yeah, so you asked us to write on our first question, and then you and Mike, you shared, and then we had to rephrase our question, right?
Yes.
So what did you purposely do in between? You probably told, but just to what was the intention of you? What did you try to achieve with us?
Do you mean in the phase of going from writing an original question and then rephrasing the question?
So in between, you both shared a story. So what did you do? What was your intention?
Well, the interesting thing is that two things really. One, really, the most important thing is that when you write your first question down, you think you know the question that's important to you. But as you listen and your subconscious keeps going in the background, usually there's a shift, and some of it is influenced by what we tell, but there's no deliberate thing we're doing by telling ourselves. We're not trying to influence your question. We're just sharing our inspiration and how it works. And what it does is just gives you that pause, and the delicious revisiting of the question gives you an opportunity to say, yeah, but is that really the thing that I want an answer to? Or maybe it's something else. And so that's the opportunity there. It just gives you that pause.
Okay, but of course you don't just tell any story. It has some relationship with the subject and what we are doing here in your own journey, right? Or does
Sure.
it?
Yeah, because today's topic is how the value of turning inwards and using a writing and self technique in order to address theories around citizenship. That was our theme, and that's the stories we told were based on that theme.
But if I would do this with students, so first rephrase, have a question, and then I would share something of my whatever, then it wouldn't really matter if it would be on topic of anything, just as it relaxes them and get those brains working.
Yes, of course it depends on the aim of your, you know, if you're asking them to talk about say their career goals, you might tell a story about your career life.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
You know, to stay with a theme in any case. So.
Stay with the theme. That's it. Okay, yeah, right. Thank you.
So for anyone who's interested in the background and the theory, we can also offer articles on the theory that's behind this method. So you can get in touch with us here. So Mijke, maybe you have some final thoughts to close our day here.
I see Ellen Shure contributing in the chat, which is she's putting the theory of career writing on topic. So thank you, Ellen, for that. And there's also a question like coming from a first to a second story.
Yes,
because I think it's very important if you do this with students that you know where you are and what you're doing. because you mentioned students also, isn't it, Nathan? So if you do it with students, I find it important that you know that this is part from coming from a first to a second story. But maybe you already told that, Mijke and Reinekke. And I don't know if you precisely tell in which you go through a certain number of stages. And I don't know exactly which exercise you did, but that is part of one of those stages, to come from a first story through emotions to a second story. And I always like that gives that you can you're not have a solution, but you have a way to act. So you can act, so it helps you to go further on, to continue your journey. And I think that's very important. And it keeps, of course, it's so, like this. It comes back, it raises new questions, but every time it helps you also to really look into your emotion, truly look into, okay, what do I feel with this? Why do I feel this? How? And they have tremendously and many exercises to help students with that. And I find that so important. Because we're all human beings, and you cannot only, although I find it very important to be inspired cognitively, but also emotionally. And well, therefore I would like to thank Reinekke and Frans Meijers, our previous lecturer, for this, but also all the work done by Mijke, Adela. I see all kind of people who really contributed to this. Also bij de Haagse Hogeschool. And yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, but this is not new, this is really continuing with a beautiful, very active career writing group. Yeah, having new research also in the Knowledge Center, Global and Inclusive Learning would be very welcome. And I know some of you already are involved in new research, but a lot has to be done, but a lot is already done, so we can use that. So thank you again.
Thank you for all those comments, Ellen, and also to bring it sort of together. I'm very mindful of time. I know that everyone has very busy schedules, and thank you for sticking around a little bit longer. And thank you so much, Reinekke and Mijke. You only had an hour, and I think it was amazing to see that within that short time frame, you were able to also let us experience the value of writing the self and career writing. I think it's definitely whet my appetite. And also thank you very much for posting your email addresses here if your colleagues want to reach out for suggestions on literature or to get to know a little bit more about the theory. I think definitely has raised a lot of more questions than we initially had, and that is really what the big conversation is about, is to start thinking more deeply about our own practice and what we can do in our practice of education. So on that note, thank you very, very much. This was this year's last big conversation, but we'll carry on in 2022. Thank you for joining today. Wishing everyone a wonderful holiday ahead, hopefully Merry Christmas and a very good start to 2022. Thank you for now.
Thank you.